Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. The morning started like any other day in Paris. The spring air was crisp, carrying the aroma of fresh-baked croissants from the corner boulangerie. I was taking photos of Notre Dame's reconstruction when everything changed. It was 9:47 a.m. The first indication that something was wrong came from the cathedral worksite. A construction worker stumbled and fell from the scaffolding. People gasped, but instead of lying still, he got up. Even from 30 yards away, I could see something was terribly wrong with the way he moved. His neck was bent at an impossible angle, yet he lurched toward his coworkers who rushed to help him. What happened next still haunts me. He grabbed the nearest person and, I still can't believe what I saw, bit into their neck. Blood sprayed across the barricades as screams erupted from the gathering crowd. Someone shouted in French, words I couldn't understand, but the panic in their voice needed no translation. I stood frozen, my camera hanging useless at my side, as chaos erupted around me. More workers from the site began attacking people. A woman next to me was calling emergency services, her voice shaking as she spoke rapid French into her phone. Tourists fled in every direction, shouting in a dozen different languages. My instincts finally kicked in when I saw one of the infected workers, I didn't have a better word for them yet, turn towards me. Their eyes were vacant, skin pale and mottled, movements rigid yet purposeful. I ran, joining the stream of people fleeing into the narrow streets of the Marais district. The medieval layout of the neighborhood quickly became a maze of terror. Narrow cobblestone streets that had seemed so charmingly historic yesterday now felt like a trap. I could hear screams echoing off the ancient stone walls, but the acoustics made it impossible to tell which direction they came from. Sirens began wailing in the distance. I ducked into a small cafe, joining several other tourists and locals who had the same idea. The owner was already pulling down the security gate, speaking rapidly in French. An elderly gentleman translated for those of us who couldn't understand. He says to stay quiet and away from the windows. We huddled in the back of the cafe, about 15 of us. A young French woman was softly crying while texting on her phone. A British couple kept trying to call the embassy, but their calls wouldn't go through. The cafe owner turned on the small TV mounted in the corner, switching between news channels. The footage was chaotic, similar scenes were unfolding across Paris. The Gare du Nord was overwhelmed with people trying to flee the city. Police were everywhere, but they seemed as confused as everyone else. The newscasters spoke with increasing urgency, but without subtitles, I could only guess at what they were saying. My own phone had no service, just an emergency alert in French that I couldn't understand. The Wi-Fi wasn't working either. I was cut off from any information or help from home, stranded in a foreign city descending into madness. Through the gaps in the security gate, we could see people running past. Occasionally, one of the infected would stumble by, their movements jerky and aggressive. They seemed to be drawn to sound and movement, turning their heads sharply at any noise. Once, one of them pressed against the gate, attracted by our whispered conversations. We all held our breath until it moved on. The cafe owner distributed bottles of water and some pastries, but nobody had much appetite. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as we waited, hoping for some sign that help was coming. Instead, the situation outside only got worse. Around noon, the power went out. In the sudden silence, without the hum of the refrigerators and TV, we could hear more clearly what was happening outside. The screams had become fewer, but the sound of breaking glass and distant gunfire had increased. One of the British tourists, a nurse, was tending to an elderly man who had scraped his leg badly while running. She whispered to me that we couldn't stay here indefinitely. We needed supplies, information, and a better shelter. She was right, but the thought of going back out there made my stomach churn. Looking around the cafe, I realized we were all strangers thrown together by circumstance, each of us far from home and safety. The phrase "safety in numbers" kept running through my mind, But so did the image of that first infected worker. Traditional rules didn't seem to apply anymore. As the afternoon wore on, the sounds outside changed. The constant sirens faded to occasional wails. The screams became more distant, but the shuffling footsteps and inhuman groans of the infected seemed to multiply. We were trapped in the heart of Paris, and the city of light was transforming into something nightmarish around us. By 2 p.m., we couldn't ignore our situation any longer. The cafe owner's radio, running on batteries, crackled with an English-language emergency broadcast. Infected individuals showing extreme aggressive behavior, avoid all contact, emergency protocols in effect. The word zombie was whispered among us, though it seemed absurd to say it out loud. The British nurse, who introduced herself as Emma, gathered us together. "Listen," she said quietly. "I've worked in emergency response. These streets will be death traps after dark. We need to find somewhere more secure, with supplies and proper barriers." She was right. The cafe's glass frontage and thin security gate wouldn't hold if a group of infected found us. Through gaps in the gate, we could see the streets filling with more shuffling figures. Their skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and dark veins were visible beneath their surface. Some still wore business suits or tourist clothing, a grotesque reminder that they were people just hours ago. The cafe owner drew a rough map, showing us we were 4 blocks from a small hotel. It had a basement storage area and proper security doors, much better than our current location. The elderly man who spoke English translated as the owner explained the back routes through service alleys. If we were careful and quiet, we might make it. We divided the few useful items we had. I emptied my camera bag, filling it instead with water bottles and energy bars from the cafe's stock. Others found makeshift weapons, chair legs, wine bottles, a chef's knife from the kitchen. The reality of needing these things made my hands shake. Just before 3 p.m., we heard the distinct sound of helicopter rotors. Through a gap in the ceiling-high windows, we saw military helicopters passing overhead. They were flying low, and the sound drew the infected into the streets. It was our chance to move through the back alleys. We left in groups of 3, staggering our departures to stay quiet. I was with Emma and a French student named Pierre, who knew the area. The back alley was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people. The walls were slick with moisture, and the scattered garbage forced us to step carefully to avoid making noise. At the first intersection, we saw one of them, a woman in a postal worker's uniform. Her neck was torn open, dried blood staining her blue collar. She wasn't moving, just standing there, swaying slightly. Emma pulled us back, pressing against the wall. We waited, hardly daring to breathe until she shuffled away. The next alley was blocked by a delivery van. We had to detour through a small courtyard. As we crossed it, we heard a crash from one of the apartments above. An infected person burst through a ground floor window, sending glass shards everywhere. Pierre reacted first, pushing me aside as the creature lunged. Emma swung her makeshift weapon, a metal rod that had once been a cafe chair leg. The impact made a sickening sound, and the infected person crumpled. "Run," Emma whispered urgently. "The noise will draw more." She was right. We could hear them coming, their footsteps echoing off the walls. We ran, no longer worried about stealth. I nearly fell on the slippery cobblestones, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The hotel's service entrance was ahead, but between us and safety was a scene from a nightmare. The street was filled with infected people, all moving with that same terrible purpose. Some were fresh, looking almost normal except for their vacant expressions. Others were heavily wounded, dragging mangled limbs yet still pursuing anything that moved. We pressed ourselves into a doorway, trying to control our panicked breathing. Emma pointed to a narrow passage between buildings. A tight squeeze, but it might get us behind the group. We had no choice. I went first, turning sideways to slip through the gap. The rough stone walls scraped my arms, and I tried not to think about what else was touching me in the darkness. Halfway through, I heard Pierre gasp. One of the infected had spotted us and was trying to force its way into the passage. Its hands, bloody and raw from clawing at walls, reached for Pierre's jacket. Emma pulled him back just in time, but his shoulder hit the wall hard. The sound echoed in the narrow space. I emerged on the other side as the first infected person began scrambling over its fallen companions, drawn by the noise. The hotel's service door was 20 yards away. Pierre came through next, then Emma. We ran as the creatures began pouring around both ends of the building. The door was locked. I felt a moment of pure terror before Pierre produced a key card. He worked at the hotel part-time. The electronic lock beeped, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. We tumbled inside just as the first infected reached us. The heavy door slammed shut, its automatic lock engaging. Through the door's small window, we watched the infected crowd around the entrance. They pounded on the metal, their bloodied hands leaving streaks on the reinforced glass. Some pressed their faces against the window, and I had to look away from their empty eyes. In the dim emergency lighting of the hotel's service corridor, we caught our breath. Emma checked Pierre's shoulder, bruised but not broken. I slid down the wall, my legs shaking too much to stand. The reality of what was happening, what we'd seen and done, began to sink in. "The others," I whispered. "The group's behind us." Emma shook her head. We'd heard screams during our run. We could only hope some had found another way, another shelter. The guilt of leaving them behind mixed with relief at our own survival, making me feel sick. Pierre led us deeper into the hotel. The basement level had a staff break room, storage areas, and most importantly, no windows. We could hear the chaos above us, running footsteps, screams, the sound of breaking glass. But in this concrete bunker, we were as safe as we could be. For now. The hotel's basement proved to be a temporary sanctuary. We found other survivors there, hotel staff and guests who'd made it down during the initial chaos. They had transformed the employee break room into a makeshift command center, with a battery-powered radio and emergency supplies spread across tables. The hotel manager, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, was organizing people into groups based on their nationalities. "The American consulate sent emergency messages about an hour ago," she explained, her accent thick but precise. "They were organizing evacuations for foreign nationals. Several other consulates sent similar alerts." My heart leaped at this news, but the manager's expression remained grave. "We lost contact 20 minutes ago. The last message was cut off mid-transmission." She pointed to a map of Paris spread across a table, marked with various routes. "The consulate is here, about 2 kilometers away, but the streets..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. A German businessman showed me his phone, a screenshot of the last message he'd received. "Emergency evacuation protocols activated. Military escort will..." The rest was missing. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m. Emma examined the map carefully. "The most direct route is impossible now," she said, tracing a line with her finger. "I saw the zombies flooding that avenue when we were upstairs, but there might be another way." She pointed to a series of smaller streets and passages that wound through the old city. The debate that followed was intense. Some argued we should wait for rescue, that leaving our secure position meant certain death. Others insisted the consulate was our only hope. The basement's supplies wouldn't last forever, and we had no way to know if help would come to us. Through the ceiling, we could hear the occasional thump and crash from above. The hotel's security doors were holding, but the sounds were a constant reminder of what waited outside. The manager had sealed off the upper floors, but she warned us that some guests hadn't made it down in time. The implication hung heavy in the air. A young mother cradled her sleeping child, tears streaming down her face as she showed us her last text exchange with her husband. He'd been at the consulate when the outbreak hit, sending updates about the evacuation plans. His messages stopped abruptly at 4:03 p.m. Time was ticking away. If there really was an evacuation happening, we couldn't afford to wait, but the risk was enormous. Through a security camera feed, we could see the street outside. The number of infected had grown. They moved in loose groups, attracted to any sound or movement. Some still looked almost normal, while others showed signs of the violence that had transformed them. Torn clothing, bloody wounds, missing limbs. Pierre found emergency floor plans that showed maintenance tunnels connecting several buildings in the area. Most were probably locked, but they might offer safer passage than the streets above. It wasn't much, but it was something. We divided the supplies: water, energy bars, first aid supplies. A security guard's locker provided 2 flashlights and a radio, though we'd yet to hear any transmissions. Emma insisted everyone take some kind of weapon, even if just to create distance from the infected. The hotel's kitchen knives were distributed among those willing to carry them. The group split. About half chose to stay, believing the hotel's defenses were their best chance. The rest of us prepared to move. 15 people in total, including Emma, Pierre, and myself. The manager gave us her master keys. They might work on some of the maintenance doors. Just before 5 p.m., we gathered in the lowest basement level. A service tunnel led to the adjacent building's parking garage. It was our best chance to move through the city without immediately exposing ourselves. The mother with the child decided to stay behind at the last minute. I saw her clutching her phone, still hoping for another message from her husband. The guilt of leaving them behind gnawed at me, but we had to move. Pierre led the way into the tunnel, his knowledge of the building's layout proving invaluable. The emergency lights cast everything in a sickly green glow. The air was stale, thick with decades of dust and neglect. Every footstep echoed despite our attempts to move quietly. Halfway through, we heard it, a sound that made everyone freeze. Somewhere ahead, metal scraped against concrete. Then another sound, unmistakable now, the shuffle-drag footsteps we'd all come to dread. Emma signaled for silence, then pointed to an electrical panel on the wall. Behind it, barely visible, was another maintenance shaft. It would be a tight squeeze, but it might bypass whatever waited ahead in the main tunnel. As we carefully removed the panel, trying to stay quiet, a distant explosion rocked the tunnel. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The sound seemed to energize the infected. Their moaning grew louder, more aggressive. We had no choice now. One by one, we squeezed through the gap behind the panel. The space was claustrophobic, forcing us to move sideways, pressing against pipes and conduit. The beam of our flashlight revealed decades of cobwebs and skittering things that fled from the light. The shaft seemed to go on forever. My chest grew tight from the dust and stale air. Someone ahead stifled a cough. Finally, we reached another panel. Through gaps in the metal, we could see we'd bypassed the main tunnel section. The infected were visible in the distance, still drawn to the sound of the explosion. Pierre worked on the panel's screws while Emma kept watch. The metal groaned as we pulled it free, the sound impossibly loud in the confined space. We froze, waiting to see if anything had heard. The next section of tunnel sloped upward. According to Pierre's mental map, we were nearing the parking garage. From there, we'd have to risk the streets briefly before accessing another building's maintenance areas. As we emerged into the garage, the scale of what we faced became clear. Through the entrance gates, we could see the city was burning. Black smoke rose from several directions. The sunset painted everything in shades of orange and red, reflecting off broken windows and abandoned cars. The consulate was out there somewhere, possibly our last hope for evacuation. But between us and potential safety lay a city that had become a hunting ground, and the hunters were growing more numerous by the minute. In the parking garage's dim light, I finally had a moment to think about home. My phone still had no signal, but I kept checking it compulsively, staring at the last message from my sister. "Have fun in Paris, send lots of pictures." The thought of her watching the news, not knowing if I was alive, made my chest tight. Was this happening in America too? Were my parents safe in their small Minnesota town? The not knowing was almost worse than the horror around us. Emma's voice snapped me back to our immediate crisis. She was outlining our route to the consulate using a tourist map someone had. The streets between us and potential rescue were unfamiliar to most of us, filled with unknown dangers. We'd have to move carefully, staying close to buildings and avoiding open areas. Our group of 15 huddled behind cars, watching the street through the garage's entrance. The infected seemed drawn to the fires burning across the city, their shadowy forms moving steadily toward the distant flames. This might be our best chance to move. We divided into 3 smaller groups to be less noticeable. Emma led the first group, I was with the second, and Pierre would bring up the rear. Each group waited 2 minutes before following, maintaining visual contact while staying far enough apart to avoid drawing attention. The first death came just minutes after we left the garage. An elderly man in Emma's group stumbled on debris, falling hard on the pavement. The sound drew the attention of several zombies that had been shambling down a side street. They moved with terrible speed toward him. 2 people tried to help him up, but it was too late. His screams attracted more of the infected. Emma had to force the rest of her group to keep moving, leaving those 3 behind. I watched it happen from behind an overturned newspaper kiosk, my hand pressed against my mouth to stay quiet. The image of those people being overwhelmed would stay with me forever. Even worse was the silence that followed the screams. We pressed on through narrow alleys and side streets, trying to stay oriented toward the consulate. The city looked alien in the fading light. Smoke hung in the air, carrying the smell of burning plastic and worse things. Cars sat abandoned, some still running with doors open. Personal belongings littered the streets. Suitcases, phones, a child's stuffed animal soaked in something dark. My group included a Canadian couple and a Japanese student. We moved in silence, communicating with hand signals Emma had taught us. At each intersection, we waited, watching for movement. The zombies seemed to cluster in open areas, but lone infected wandered everywhere, appearing suddenly from doorways or around corners. A helicopter passed overhead, flying low enough to see clearly. It wasn't a rescue craft. It looked military and carried what appeared to be large containers beneath it. What did that mean? Was the military containing the situation, or just monitoring it? I thought of similar helicopters flying over American cities, and my stomach churned. We lost 2 more people at a boulevard we had to cross. There was no way around it. The alternate routes were blocked by burning vehicles. We waited for a gap in the infected, then ran. The Japanese student made it halfway before freezing in panic. A businessman from our group ran back to help her, but they were both caught. Their deaths were quick, at least. I forced myself to watch, to remember. Every loss was a lesson in survival. The remaining 10 of us regrouped in a dentist's office. Pierre had studied the map and found a route through more residential areas. As we caught our breath, someone's phone suddenly chirped. A text had somehow gotten through. The sound made us all jump, but the message was worse. Paris is lost. Military containment protocols in effect. No unauthorized evacuation permitted. The Canadian woman began quietly crying. Her husband showed us a news alert he'd managed to load. Similar outbreaks were being reported in London, Berlin, and Madrid. A blurry video showed infected people overwhelming police barricades in Brussels. The virus was spreading across Europe. I tried calling my family again, desperate to warn them, to hear their voices. The call failed, but for a moment I saw my signal bars flicker. Was the network being restored or shutting down completely? A text started to send, "I'm alive," trying to reach consulate, but failed halfway through. Pierre found prescription painkillers in the dentist's supplies and distributed them. We'd all collected bruises and sprains from our desperate flight through the city. As he helped bandage a cut on my arm, he told me his brother was a doctor in Lyon. "He warned me this morning that something strange was happening at the hospitals," he whispered. But by the time I understood, it was too late to leave the city. Emma called us together. The consulate was close now. Maybe 15 minutes away if we didn't have to detour. But the streets were getting worse. More fires, more infected, and now a new problem. Some of the zombies seemed to be wandering in larger groups, almost hunting together. We left the dental office as the last light faded from the sky. The darkness brought new terrors. We couldn't risk using flashlights, so we had to move slowly, feeling our way along walls. The infected were harder to spot, often visible only when they moved against the glow of distant fires. A group decision was made to use the rooftops where possible. Many buildings in this district shared connected roofing, with maintenance walkways between them. It was dangerous in the dark, but safer than the streets below. Pierre led us up a fire escape, testing each step before letting others follow. On the rooftops, we could see the full scope of the catastrophe. Fires burned across Paris, casting an apocalyptic glow over the city. The Eiffel Tower stood dark against the sky, strange to see it without its usual lights. Sirens had mostly stopped, replaced by occasional gunfire, and the distant sound of breaking glass. The consulate's flag was visible a few blocks away, illuminated by emergency floodlights powered by generators. It looked like a fortress compared to the darkness around it, but reaching it meant crossing a wide plaza with no cover. From our elevated position, we could see dozens of infected roaming the open space. As we planned our approach, an explosion rocked a building nearby. The shockwave knocked me off balance. Through the smoke and flames, I saw what had caused it. A military jet screamed past, so low I could see the pilot's helmet. More explosions followed, moving in a line across the city. What were they targeting? What did they know that we didn't? The questions added to my growing fear that there would be no rescue, no evacuation, no happy ending to this nightmare. Below us, the infected began moving toward the explosions, drawn by the noise and light. The plaza was clearing. "Now," Emma whispered, "while they're distracted. It's our best chance." We climbed down to street level, staying close to the walls. The consulate was so close, but as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into another trap. Just like the people at Notre Dame this morning. Had it really only been 12 hours? It felt like a lifetime ago. The infected were returning now, having lost interest in the distant explosions. We'd have to move fast. Emma took point, leading us toward what might be our last hope for survival. Behind us, Paris burned. Ahead, the consulate's lights beckoned. But would anyone be left alive inside to help us? The consulate gates opened just enough to let us slip through before slamming shut behind us. Marine guards ushered us inside, their faces tense and weapons ready. We were the last civilians they would evacuate. The order to abandon the consulate had come minutes before our arrival. Through the consulate windows, I saw Paris drowning in chaos. The Louvre's courtyard had become a killing field, zombies swarming through the iconic glass pyramid. Near the Arc de Triomphe, thousands of infected moved like a dark tide through abandoned vehicles. The Champs-Élysées, usually gleaming with lights and life, had become a corridor of death. A military helicopter waited in the courtyard, rotors already spinning. The Marines shouted, hurrying us aboard. As we lifted off, I caught one last glimpse of the city. Notre Dame's skeletal reconstruction stood like a monument to destruction, smoke billowing around its ancient towers. The Seine reflected the fires burning along its banks, a river of flame cutting through the heart of Paris. Emma gripped my arm, pointing toward Montmartre. The white domes of Sacré-Cœur stood pristine above the chaos, but the streets below teemed with infected. Thousands of them flowed down the historic steps like a waterfall of bodies, drawn by the noise and light of the burning city. The pilot's voice crackled through our headsets. "Charles de Gaulle Airport is our evacuation point. Last flights are departing within the hour. After that..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Flying over Paris revealed the true scope of devastation. The Eiffel Tower stood dark, surrounded by a sea of infected. Gardens that had enchanted tourists that morning were now trampled killing grounds. Every major intersection had become a bottleneck of abandoned cars and wandering zombies. We approached the airport, its runways lit by emergency lighting. Through the helicopter's windows, I could see the last evacuation plane. My lifeline home, my chance to see my family again. Its cabins were illuminated, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Just a few more minutes, and we'd be there. Then we saw it. A passenger jet approaching at a strange angle, smoke trailing from its engines like dark ribbons against the night sky. Something was terribly wrong. The aircraft lurched, its wing dipping sharply as it descended. My heart stopped as I realized what was about to happen. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" our pilot screamed, banking the helicopter hard. The jet's death spiral seemed to happen in slow motion. I pressed my hands against the glass, watching helplessly as my last chance of getting home plummeted toward the runway. The impact was devastating. Metal screamed against concrete as the jet cartwheeled across the tarmac, breaking apart in a horrific display of fire and twisted steel. The explosion that followed consumed everything, including the evacuation plane that would have carried us to safety. The shockwave hit our helicopter like a giant's hand, the heat so intense it fogged the windows. My throat closed as I watched the inferno below, realizing that my path home had literally gone up in flames. The pilot swore, then spoke rapidly into his radio. After a tense moment, he addressed us. "Change of plans, airport's gone. We're diverting to a naval vessel in the Atlantic. It's accepting evacuees until midnight." I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching Paris recede into the darkness. The city of my dreams had become a nightmare I might never wake from. My phone still showed the unsent message to my family. "I'm alive." Trying to reach consulate. Now even that small hope of reunion was burning on the runway behind us. Emma touched my shoulder gently. Her face reflected the same mix of relief and despair I felt. We had survived the first 12 hours of this apocalypse, but at what cost? The world was changing. Borders were closing and I was flying away from everything and everyone I loved. "We'll find a way," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "We'll find a way home." Below us, France's countryside rolled past in darkness, punctuated by fires marking other towns and cities facing their own battles against the infected. Ahead lay the Atlantic, and maybe safety. But my heart remained in Paris and my thoughts with my family across the ocean, in an America that might already be facing its own darkest hour. The helicopter flew on through the night, carrying us toward an uncertain future. But I had survived Paris. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same determination that had kept me alive on those blood-soaked streets. Somehow, someday, I would find my way home.